mme o tla hopola ona wa bobedi ke mo teng re buang ditaba tse amanang le Parlamente ya Afrika, mme he bekeng ena re ntshetsa pele ditaba tsa rona tseo re ileng ra qoqa ka tsona bekeng e fetileng, mme moeti wa rona letsheareng la kajeno ke Dr Maurice Ezuirike. Ke ena ke senior parliamentary advisor ya Parlamente ya Afrika, mme re tlo qoqa le yena letsatsing la kajeno ho ntshetsa pele ditaba tseo re ileng ra bua le yena ka tsona lenaneong lona lena. Dr. Maurice?
Yes, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you and welcome to Roto Lataba on Radio Lesotho.
Glad to be with you.
Thank you. Dr. Maurice, last week we were talking about the international or best international practices when it comes to addressing matters such as current situations at the Pan-African Parliament or the Pan-African Parliament finds itself in. Can you please take us, throw us more light on the Pan-African amended rules of procedure?
Thank you so much. It's good to be with you this afternoon. What we did in amending the PAP rules of procedure was not unusual. In fact, parliamentary institutions periodically undergo a process of institutional readjustment of their to make sure that it conforms to critical realities in the globe. So the amendment process was an opportunity that the Pan-African Parliament had to reposition the Pan-African Parliament and revitalize the fabric of the parliamentary institution and reposition it for more effective parliamentary practices. So it wasn't unusual. The process was more or less in line to ensure that the Pan-African Parliament conforms its practices to modern realities, to make sure that there's an institutionalization of existing plenary resolutions. They wanted to make sure that there's a codification of those past resolutions adopted by the plenary. And also to institutionalize some executive council decisions, particularly relating to the principle of geographical rotation, which prior to the amended procedure was not included in the PAP amended rules. And the principle of geographical rotation has been in practice in the AU since its transformation in 2002. And in fact, has been in practice in the Pan-African Parliament since 2004 when it was established. However, there has been some arguments in the past that because it was not reflected in internal rules of procedure, that it would not be implemented. So the amendment process sort of created the platform for institutionalization of those practices that are within the AU. A lot of things actually transpired in that process, but what I can tell you is that it really positioned the Pan-African Parliament to a position where they became more responsive, more formidable, more capable to address global exigencies, continental issues and challenges. The Parliament became more or less reinvigorated and repositioned to address a series of continental challenges, and again, revitalized its image within the AU governance architecture.
You talked of the continental challenges that the Pan-African Parliament is able to address. Which ones can you point out that have been addressed through this?
When you look at the spate of unconstitutional changes of government in the continent, when you look at the fact that there has been a consistent changes through unconstitutional means in the continent, then you begin to appreciate the relative role of the Pan-African Parliament in becoming stronger and more reinvigorated, because the Pan-African Parliament is the pillar more or less enhanced through the newly adopted rules of procedure. They've been able to instill the sense of democracy in the continent. They get involved in election observer missions, where they're able to go to those countries that are involved in elections and gather relevant data on how to improve democracy and ensure that the will of the people are respected and adhered to. But most fundamentally, the Pan-African Parliament has become more or less involved in addressing the fundamental roots the fundamental roots of unconstitutional changes in government by looking at some of the issues of inclusive growth, bringing about sustainable development in the continent, bringing about working with the AU in ensuring that there's an acceleration of those legal instruments that has to do with economic sustainability in the continent, because they understood and in fact appreciate the fact that the spate of unconstitutional changes in government and the manner in which they have been received by the people is a reflection of economic dilapidation in those countries. And whatever that can be done to spur economic growth in the continent, in the respective countries, would definitely ensure that democracy is installed and sustained within the African continent. So the Pan-African Parliament has a broad responsibility in their engagements through some of the internal processes and procedures to engage more directly with the people of Africa. They've engaged in peace and security missions, fact-finding missions in areas where there's conflict, and they've been able to give of the humanitarian dimension of those conflicts and bring it back to where tangible resolutions can be drafted and then policies can be developed that will bring about an end to conflicts, bring about economic sustainability and economic growth.
Looking at the Pan-African Parliament being part of the election observer missions throughout the country, how useful or how is it used to capacitate others who will come after in order to ensure that elections in Africa are transparent, are fair, and are credible?
When you look at the fact that the Pan-African Parliament are by far the very organ within the African Union that has a significant net grassroots communities. They are the ones that came to power by virtue of elections. So they understand the electioneering process. They understand the yearnings of the people of the continent. Be able to establish a good foundation that will really help bring about recommendations that could contribute to the strengthening of democracy and stable governance within the continent. Again, by virtue of their nexus, having been involved in elections themselves, they're very much connected integrally to the grassroots communities, and they understand the yearnings of the people. They understand the challenges. They can understand the pitfalls and things that needed to be done to ensure that democracy and election process has some credibility and is sustained in a democratic manner within the continent.
How does this amended rules of procedure help the Pan-African Parliament to live up to its mandate and aspirations of serving people of Africa?
When you look at the areas that really were fundamental to the amended rules, you look at the fact that prior to the amended rules, there were no provisions for virtual meetings. Now they do have it, because if you consider what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, most parliamentary institutions within the continent were not able to meet. And as a result, those oversight responsibilities that they have over the government were not done. So the duties and functions of the people, their businesses were not carried on as a result of the parliamentary institutions being shut down. So now the Pan-African Parliament can be more responsive whenever there's a pandemic or anything of that nature that will result to a global crisis. They'll be able to meet and formulate positions and principles that can help address continental challenges. Now, you also look at the fact that the composition of the committees were also expanded in the new committee, in the new amended rules from 11 to 15. And the expansion was due to a realignment of the thematic areas of those committees. Something like health was created as a standalone committee that recognizes the importance of having a formidable committee system that can work with the AU and work with institutions within the African government to address head-on issues of health challenges, give us an opportunity to be more ready to address any pandemic or any matter of health crisis within the continent. So you look at all of those issues, the formidability of the Pan-African Parliament was enhanced. Their integrity and their ability to respond more forcefully to issues of continental challenges were also enhanced as a result of this particular rules amended. They became more forceful in accelerating the ratification and domestication with regional parliaments and all the leaders and stakeholders on matters that are very vital to the African people.
How different is the current amended rules of procedure in comparison to the previous ones?
There are 5 major areas that I can point to at this particular point. There are 94 rules in the amended rules of procedure. Prior to this time, prior to the amended rules of procedure, there was no virtual meeting. There was no provision for it. Now, we do have an elaborate modalities for the implementation of virtual sittings of the Pan-African Parliament. That's one notable area. The second area has to do with the enhancement of our committee structure to bring about consistency in the thematic alignment, to make sure there's some level of compatibility between the thematic areas. For instance, you can have health aligned with trade. So there's an opportunity, there was an opportunity that the Pan-African Parliament seized on to break those committee systems in a manner that will make them more effective and more efficient in the delivery of the services. Now, the most profound change, of course, that came about has to do with and mandate of members of the Pan-African Parliament. Prior to the amended rules, we had a situation where when there are elections in the member states, those members who are elected to the Pan-African Parliament have to vacate their seat. That gave the impression that dissolution of parliament for election purposes in the member states is synonymous to cessation of membership. What has happened is that if you look at the continent of Africa, there are various electioneering schedules and calendar within the continent. Some countries will dissolve their parliament 1 month before election. Some dissolve their parliament 3 months before election. Some do not dissolve their parliament at all. So with the new rules, they were able to define what it means to cease to be a member of parliament. And they've defined it by saying that it relates to the situation where there's been a letter or a correspondence from the clerk of the national parliament of the member state advising the clerk of the Pan-African Parliament that a member has not been re-elected or redesignated to the Pan-African Parliament. So it's no longer predicated on dissolution that created conflicting interpretations on when a member ceases to be a member of parliament. But with this particular amended rules and the definition provided on what constitutes ceases to be a member, what constitutes returning member, what constitutes vacancy, there has been some level of stability, consistency, and continuity in the leadership of the Pan-African Parliament, unlike before. So the usual consistent contestations for leadership positions has now been eliminated, because once you have been elected and you go back to your country and you are returned to the Pan-African Parliament, there is a retention of competency and there's a continuity in the leadership of the Pan-African Parliament. That was not done before the amended rules. Now we do have it. Again, it is not incompatible with the protocol because the language in the amended rules is quite consistent with the language of the protocol. What we did in the amended rules was to amplify and create areas and omissions that existed in the protocol by giving clarity to those areas that were not defined in the protocol.
Dr. Maurice, I would like to invite 2 or 3 listeners to be part of this discussion. So, Momamedi, re ya o mema he le wena hore o be karolo ya ditaba tsena tseo re ntseng re di qoqa le Dr. Maurice le tsheareng la kajeno. Nomoro ya mohala ke 59933 leo o tla hokahana le rona ka yona hore le wena o be karolo ya ditaba tsena tseo re ntseng re di qoqa. Hopola hore ditaba tsa rona ke ditaba tse amanang le Parlamente ya Afrika, mme he mothating ona re ne re bua ka ditaba tsena tsa amended rules of procedure kapa melao e hlomathisitsweng ya tsamaiso ditabeng tsa Palamente ya Afrika. Mme o ikutlwetse he hore na Dr Maurice o beile ditaba ka sebopego sefe le wena re a o mema he hore o be karolo ya ditaba tsena. Dinomoro ke tsona tseno tsa 59933 22316429 ke nomoro ya o ka kena ka tsona di le pedi Mosotho wa heso hore le wena o botse Dr Maurice mo e bang o na le dipotso, mme mo e bang o na le ditho le maikutlo le teng re ntse go amohela 22316429 le 59933 ke dinomoro tseo go memang ka tsona hore o be le seabo ka tsona ditabeng tsena tseo re ntseng re di otlolla letsheareng la ka jeno. Ke nomoro ya mohala he Mosotho wa heso e go memang ka yona. Mamedi dumela. Ntate. Ntate. Ntate Slo.
Nna.
Ntate.
Ke na jwale tsa ne re tla ba le dipotso jwale bua ba le ho bua o jwale ile gona re a bua.
Re tla hlalosa Ntate Slo mo e bang ha wa utlwisisa ntate re ne re re mo e bang o ka ba le ho utlwisisa.
O mo e bang ha ona mo go ha nne re ke sa re ba
ke a leboha Ntate Slo. 22316429 le 59933 ke nomoro ya mohala yo go memang ka yona he Mosotho wa heso hore le wena o be le seabo ka yona ditabeng tsena tseo re ntseng re di otlolla le Dr Maurice le tsheareng la kajeno. Empa he haeba ditaba tsena di hlakile Mosotho wa heso ke nahana hore ditaba tsa rona tsa Palamente ya Afrika tsa beke ena re tla di ba khutla empa he Mamedi dumela. Mamedi dumela. Re ke ne ke nana mo e bang o utlwile Ntate Ranteu empa he haeba o hlakile Ntate Ranteu ke a leboha. Dr Maurice.
Yes, I can hear you.
Ntate Ranteu is wondering, in your opinion, which African parliament or member states of the Pan-African Parliament would you say is best in service delivery, Lesotho included? Because in his opinion, most parliamentarians are for themselves rather than for the nation.
It will be very difficult for me to make an assessment of the relative capacity of the various continental parliaments. But I can tell you that ever since the emergence of the Pan-African Parliament, there has been an increase, or rather an enhancement in the capacity of parliamentarians to deal with the root issues of the people of Africa, to ensure that there is a reflection of the challenges facing the grassroots people in their national deliberations, in their national debates, in their national budgets. So there has been some increased sensitization of the need for inclusive growth through the Pan-African Parliament, because every year they have a conference of speakers of the African parliaments where they come together and deliberate on common issues. So through that platform, the Pan-African Parliament has been very instrumental in ensuring that those critical challenges facing the people of Africa are reflected in national budgetary priorities. Yes, I acknowledge there is some reservations within the continent about the capacity of our parliamentarians to really articulate and represent the will of the people in contrast to themselves. But that's not unique to Africa. It's also some challenges facing some European countries. But yes, in Africa, more needs to be done. And I think the Pan-African Parliament, through their institutional programs, can really enhance the capacity of the national parliamentarians who are designated to the Pan-African Parliament to ensure that issues affecting common Africans like you and I are reflected in the national budgetary discussions and priorities.
Dr. Maurice, thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Ntate Randeu ke a tshepa o utlwile ntate. Dr. Maurice o bontshitse hore ka lebaka la parliamente ena ya Afrika ho batla